Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. G'day and welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh in Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Zack Semke in Seattle, Washington.
How you doing, Zack?
I'm well. Thanks to the magic of podcast recording, this is now
We're
after
in the future.
the International Passive House Conference.
Yeah.
I think it was great.
We think it was great. So we're recording this before the conference, but this will be going live after the conference. And exciting that this is our regular episode, but around this time we'll also should have starting to line up a whole bunch of additional episodes with some great interviews and content from the conference.
That's right. Yeah.
But great to have some regular programming, and this was an awesome interview. Some quite unique aspects to this, which I really enjoyed, and I found very thought provoking as well, which is also really beneficial and enjoyable. So, looking forward to getting to that. But before we do, let's thank our sponsors.
Yeah, so everything that Passive House Accelerator does, including the Passive House podcast, comes thanks to generous support from our sponsors. So our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxter Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minitaire All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
All right. Tell us a little bit about Eddy Voltaire.
Yeah, well, Eddy Voltaire is a board member of the Passive House Network. He is a trained architect, has a history as a builder as well, does consulting work in the US and in Haiti and elsewhere. And I first met him a few years ago at the Passive House Network conference in New York, and really enjoyed speaking with him there. And I think we will share a recording of that conversation in show notes. So Eddy and Derek Tillman are heading up a DEI series, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series of presentations, Zoom meetings and presentations for the Passive House Network. And so they just did episode 1 a little bit ago. It was focused on Derek Tillman's project in Pittsburgh, which was really inspiring. And so on the heels of that, I reached out to Eddy to see if we could talk more about that effort and catch up on what he's up to and his work. And so that's what we did. So I'm hoping that folks will enjoy this interview with Eddy Voltaire. I have Eddy Voltaire, urbanist, designer, and certified Passive House tradesperson here with me. Eddy, welcome to the Passive House podcast.
Thank you, Zack. Thank you. Happy to be here.
It is great to have you here. We had a chance to talk a few years ago at the Passive House Network conference in New York, and so it's a pleasure to be able to follow up with a full length episode here with you. So thanks for your time.
Absolutely. That last conversation almost feels like a lifetime away, right? It's
yeah, no kidding.
time flies.
It's so true. And there's been a lot in all of our lives
a
since
lot
then.
happened since then. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was hoping we could start with your journey a bit. And I mean, I know that your training began with a bachelor's in architecture. But from there, what was your pathway that got you to where you are today? And also, what brought you to Passive House?
That's an interesting question within itself. Where do I start? All right, so my pathway and into the work that I do today and what brought me to Passive House is kind of, it hasn't been a straight path. I don't think anybody necessarily has a straight path into their career goals, because what tends to happen is that as you learn more, your objectives and goals start to change. So I started off working primarily with developers on development projects. And what I started to notice was that a lot of these projects, they didn't add value to communities. What they created was revenue streams that turned communities into points of extraction, right? Where wealth was being pulled out of communities. And for me, it was problematic. And that was actually the point that I left and went to architecture school, right? Because I realized that in order to do more, you have to become more, right? You have to push yourself into a position that you might not necessarily be comfortable with, right? But change doesn't occur when you stay within your comfort range, right? My comfort space was project management, but in order for me to provide the kind of work that I feel was fulfilling for my life, I had to walk away from it and push to become more. And that's what led me to architecture school. And through my path through architecture school, I actually met Broen in 2016. And that's what introduced me to Passive House. And I remember at the time, prior to that, we was doing a lot of work in the Rockaways after Hurricane Sandy, and the building typologies and the way they was going about doing the repair work, it didn't make any sense logically to build back, quote unquote, better the same way as you've always been building. So I was always searching since then for a better way of building. And I came across an email about Passive House, and I ended up at a conference in 2016, and I've been involved ever since. There's no turning back. Once you know what Passive House can actually provide, and I'm not even talking about the building typology within itself, right? It's just a thing about Passive House that extends into it's the externalities involved in Passive House, right? It's Passive House and then all the things that Passive House brings about, whether it's environmental, health concerns, spatial justice, it's all related, right? And that's what keeps me involved in Passive House.
Yeah, well said. So before your bachelor's in architecture, then you were doing project management. So were you in construction?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in construction.
Which is a great training for design as well. It really is. It really is.
But here's what I have to say about project management and architecture, which to me, I caution architects when it comes to working with developers, because you have a tendency as a designer, right, to want certain aspects of the project to align with your ambitions and your ideologies, but then you have developers who have a completely different idea, right? They just get in, make money. Who gives a damn about the end result, right? I can't say that's all developers, but I'm talking a lot of crap about developers right now. But
well, I know for a fact that we're going to talk about a developer who doesn't fit that mold later, so it's okay. Yeah. We'll have some balance. It's all good. You go.
So I'm not talking about the good developers. Right, we're talking about a specific
right. No, I hear you.
Yeah. There's a certain degree of intentionality and concern for the community that you have to have as a developer, that I think that a lot of architects do have, right? But then it becomes this issue, this struggle between, this is who's paying me, right? And this is the scope of the project. my ideals and what I would suggest might not necessarily align with that. So let me just kind of set it aside and then do what's necessary to get the project completed, right? And I think that that's probably one of the biggest mistakes we make as designers, right? We don't necessarily push as hard as we can to address certain issues that we know deep in our course should align with these projects.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to kind of probe a little bit at, I think, the heart of the conversation to come around DEI. I would love to also just get a sense of what your work is like now. Like what projects are you working on, and I know you're really busy. What's going on for you?
Well, right now, the project that I work with is primarily community engagement, preservation, and development. Right. So we're working with a community in Brooklyn, New York, the Nehemiah houses, in preserving that community and trying to find ways to resist against gentrification, upzoning, and a lot of these issues that come along with not having control of the community. I'm also working on projects overseas in Haiti and looking at a couple of other projects that align in Grenada.
Awesome. So, and you joined the Passive House Network board a couple of years ago, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, which is fantastic. So what is it, when you joined and in your work now with Passive House Network, what sort of impact are you hoping to make, or changes are you hoping to see? And what's
changes that I'm hoping to see within the Passive House Network? Here's what I can tell you about the Passive House Network and the board. It's very active. There's a lot of goals and agendas that we're pushing for, and what we're hoping to see is this evolution of ideals, right? I think that the Passive House community does a tremendous job in sharing information and knowledge around Passive House. I don't think that I've ever come into contact with a member of the Passive House community or the Passive House network that wasn't willing to share their experience. Right? And to me, that's powerful. And what I would like to see happen during my tenure here with the Passive House network is that same energy aligned with DEI efforts, right? I would love to see us come together more as a community to have these conversations that we're not having. I think that when you think about issues surrounding spatial justice, health, equality, it all aligns with the Passive House agenda. And as a community, we also need to have those conversations at the same level of engagement that we do when it comes to like an ERV, right? Right, or wall assembly. I get super excited about it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people within the Passive House community also do, right? But I also want to see that same enthusiasm when it comes to issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah. And to that end, you and Derek Tillman, who is also on the board, and he's with Bridging the Gap Development in Pittsburgh, have launched a new series at PHN, the PHN DEI Series. And you just had the first episode that featured Derek and his project, Fifth and Dinwiddie in Pittsburgh. Could you tell us about that series and kind of what the vision is for it?
Sure. So the first episode featuring Derek was, in a lot of ways, super critical, as it is the first episode, right? It's setting the stage for things to come. And we thought Derek was perfect as a first feature because, the level of intentionality that Derek approaches his projects with, it speaks volume. But Derek also comes from a different space, right? Where the same issues that he's addressed he has been directly affected by, right? And it really does show in his work. What I found interesting is that his process, it is more organic and inclusive from the beginning, right? Which is, I think, in a lot of projects, when you're pulling a team together, right, you're thinking about a team of professionals, whether it's engineers, architects, or whoever, right? But then the community is looked upon as a different knowledge set that might not necessarily be viewed as professional. But yet they have all of the information necessary for you to touch the ground. As designers, we don't design from the ground, right? We design from an elevated perspective where we're looking down upon whether it's a map, right? It's a grid. Whatever we're doing as designers, we look down, right? So we never necessarily touch the ground. And this and that's critical for any DEI effort. You have to touch the ground. If you don't take the time to walk through a community, eat the food that they eat, smell the air that they smell, right? Feel the heat that they feel, how can you design for that community? And how could you do so without their involvement, right? You have to touch the ground. And to me, that's the key aspect of having this DEI effort, is to get people to touch the ground.
And it's really powerful. It's not I hadn't really thought about that sense of perspective of from kind of this elevated place that designers are viewing projects from just naturally. And forgive me for this, but that I can't help but think about there's a blue Buddha that is kind of associated with connection to the earth and kind of like environmental stewardship. Yeah. And one of the key symbols of the blue Buddha is touching the ground. Yeah. Is that and it's part of like being in tune, like being connected to what's real. Mm-hmm. is really what that at least my understanding. I'm certainly
that's a great interpretation.
Buddhist scholar. So we'll leave religious that's the extent of my religious scholarly work is over now.
Well, I agree with you with that perspective, right? Because you have to touch the ground. Yeah. And I think another issue that we have is we don't necessarily know what we don't know. Right? You have to take a step back and start to reflect on your own positionality, right? There's this aspect of you where you want to do the right thing and you're assuming you're doing the right thing. But without engaging the community, you're not. It's just not possible. Mm-hmm. There was a project I believe it was in Zimbabwe. Now I'm gonna probably botch this up in its entirety, but it's worth a go at. Yeah, right. Yeah. So the designer created a multifamily development, and when they turned it over to the community, the community could not use it, right? Because their culture didn't align with the typology or even the spatial programming of the building. Right. So when you think about modernism and how modernism affects neoliberal designs that we see today, right? We have these huge skyscrapers that are not even occupied. Right. What is the message that our design is presenting to a community? Right. We design in ways where we're introducing these typologies that doesn't necessarily match the community. But it has impact that's long lasting. And what I find is that architecture development has a way of creating a sense of belonging and telling people whether they are invited or not. It influences the production of culture, and it also contributes to erasure of that culture that's existing, and it replaces it with something else. And that's where we run into a lot of issues, where people do not have a sense of belonging anymore. And then we start to create situations where we're othering people.
Yeah.
which is a dangerous proposition, right? That a community cannot thrive in that manner.
Right.
We have to respect what was there.
Right. The urban renewal is one famous and huge, large scale project at that kind of erasure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad you brought up that, right? Urban renewal within itself. What was urban renewal?
Yeah. What a term as well.
Yeah. To me, urban renewal is a euphemism. What did it really do? Urban renewal was really Negro removal. Right? That's what it really did, right? You ran highways through communities that was thriving in order for you to destroy them, right? And eventually what happened to those same communities where the real estate values depleted, income gentrification, right? And that also speaks to disinvestment within those same communities that you're intentionally destroying. And I feel that by design, we are ruined. So by design, we also have to find a solution.
Yeah. So, really powerful. Derek was sharing his Fifth and Dinwiddie project on episode 1, which is super exciting project. It's 2 buildings, one of them pretty big scale. It's this combination of passive house retrofit and new construction. And as you pointed out, and as he kind of shared, it's really going way above and beyond what's kind of common in terms of affordability goals, right? I mean, it's going deep on affordability goals. And he shared his upbringing in Pittsburgh. I mean, he's from this community. I think he spent time growing up in different parts of the city, grew up in poverty. So there's this really, as you mentioned, this like deep connection and set of roots that he has in the city and in this project in particular. So in this conversation, he brought up the concept of policy violence. So I think that you kind of engaged with him a little bit in the discussion session about it. Could you fill that concept out a little bit for us, and what policy violence looks like in the realm of buildings? I mean, I think that maybe we're already kind of there a little bit, but and then you mentioned design as, design has kind of created this problem. Design is part of that solution. So how can we as a community begin to address that?
I think as a community, we first have to understand the root of poverty and policy violence, right? When you think about the built environment within itself, that level of violence, we can date back to the 1400s.
Yeah.
Right? To the beginning of colonialism. When the Spanish first landed in North America in the 1400s, long before the Berlin Conference in Africa was subdivided amongst colonial nations, what would happen is that these policies was created of who would control what territory. But if we look at it from a perspective of design, is that the designs that were implemented within these communities erased what was there. If the built environment of that community was replaced by something that was more Eurocentric, it spoke to people about what was allowed and what wasn't. And I mean, even if we start to, I don't want to give a long history lesson, but right, the idea of violence policy also expands into economics, into spatial justice. If we go back to the 1800s, a different form of violence was through the racial riots, right? It told people where to go and where not to. So it was a form of redlining before we had quote unquote redlining. So violence within itself isn't isolated to just policy. Policy just reinforces different forms of violence. And I think as a community, if we're engaging in design,
what would you share with folks who are thinking about that, and share with me, because I'm thinking about it, and know that we have so much work to do in this arena.
I think what I would tell anybody who's in this arena or thinking about it is to say it out loud. Say it out loud so we can all hear you, and we can aid you and support you. We can know that this is the direction that you're moving forward in, that you're not alone, right? That you have a community behind you. It's not easy, right? It's when you look at policy, is difficult moving towards most DEI efforts because it's not something that's tangible in the form of monetary gains, right? I can't put a dollar value to the good that you do in that respect, right? We know that exists because scientists are actually starting to be able to quantify this now, right? They're able to tie a healthy indoor environment to reduction in health costs, right? They're able to equate reduction in crime and people being able to retain more of their own incomes, right? So in any DEI effort, we have to understand that you don't stand alone. That as large of a community that Passive House is, that we're engaging in these conversations, and you shouldn't feel uncomfortable sharing your losses as well as your victories, right? You should be able to tell us your struggles. We want to hear your struggles, because in hearing your struggles, we find a solution. But if you don't say it out loud, if you don't share your story, we get nowhere. Because you have to understand, your silence is complacency. Your silence is a statement. It is a position. So let's not be silent. Let's have those conversations and take a position and actively find and work towards a solution.
Thank you. Yeah. So I know that your work is centered on community engagement and probably empowerment and governance, right? And one of the things that and you were exploring earlier the benefits of Passive House, addressing fuel poverty, addressing indoor air quality. And I think that, also the affordable housing community has been a leader in connecting Passive House with people of low income people, and which is great. And those projects still can kind of happen to people, right? And that there are a lot of reasons for that, with the development cycle and pressures and things. So, but that doesn't feel like energy democracy, yet. If it's progress to be seeing a bunch of affordable housing, Passive House projects happen, and it's very exciting. And I think that there are examples where there is real kind of community voice and governance in how those projects look, and the way that where the community has a role in shaping them. So can you share ideas about kind of how that can happen, maybe examples of where it is happening, but how can we take that next step in kind of democratizing this transition to better buildings that we're hoping to see?
Well, I think one step forward is to understand that affordable housing within itself is not how you build equity. Affordable housing does not equate to wealth generation for the people who actually occupy these spaces, right? It's a point of extraction. There's no ownership, right? So what is it that we can implement that allow people to be able to generate, or at least hold on to their wealth? the only solution that exists is passive house, right? If you're reducing the cost of living by 70% plus, that additional income is a means. Like there's a lot of issues, and we can't solve it all through passive house. But if we're thinking in terms of passive house, we have to think dialectical, and what does that mean, right? Passive house provides not just a way to reduce the cost of living, right? It also improves overall health, right? And we have to understand, what does that mean to the communities that we're serving. When you start to develop within most communities, what people tend to see is we're losing control of our community, right? There's this issue of erasure that is undeniable, right? Because we see it happening throughout the country. We have to take a step back and reflect on what it is that we're doing, and approach it with a little bit more intentionality and understanding on what's happening on the ground. People are not comfortable with large scale developments because, in a way, it's similar to Roman pillars, right? When you walk by the the courthouses and you see these huge columns, it tells people that you do not belong here anymore, right? So through development, we're actually pushing that agenda forward. That's why we have to take a step back and really look at what is it that we're implementing into these projects that allow a community to continue its own cultural production, right? And not feel as if they're being invaded, but we're adding some form of benefit to that community. Housing is a huge issue. So, there's a huge argument about ownership and affordability that doesn't necessarily align together, right? And particularly in New York, different states have their own issues, and this is what's great about the case studies, right? I would love to hear about DEI efforts surrounding affordability in other states and see how that compares to New York, Philadelphia, Florida, or even overseas, right? I think that's our starting point, understanding the relationship between what we're implementing, what's happening on the ground, and what does it mean to the people who actually live there and will occupy these spaces. You see, a lot of time with developments, the people who live there aren't the ones that's occupying the spaces. Affordable housings and the laws surrounding affordable housing actually makes it unaffordable for the people who actually live in the area, right? The AMI, the area mean income, is drastically increased through gentrification, and it starts to make those who originally inhabited the area not even qualified to occupy quote unquote affordable housing in their own communities.
Wow. This conversation, I am just so appreciative of it. It's super, you're both thought-provoking and very motivating. And I think that that silence is complacency is ringing in my ears. So there's I know that this is a journey, and we have as a community have a lot of work to do, and I know the accelerator has a lot of work to do in this area, and I am excited about the series that you and Derek have embarked on with PHN. It's
thank you.
I think really, really important and really good to see. So thank you for that work, and for sharing your wisdom with us here in this conversation as well. I really appreciate it. So I know that you're a busy person, so I want to respect your time, but is there anything else that you'd like to touch on or share before we close up?
Well, what I would like to touch on before we close out is I hope through this conversation we get more people to share their stories. We want to activate the community, motivate the community, as well as educate the community. The only how we do so is by sharing our stories, right? I want the Passive House community, and this really builds off of where we left off of the previous conference. This idea of equality and Passive House for all, as well as moving towards an agenda that's reflective of the communities that we serve, right? So to anybody who might watch the podcast, share your story, DEI@passivehousenetwork.org. We're also working on a form when you log onto the website where you can submit your story. For me, we really have no preference, right? Your story is your story, and it's important. And it's important no matter how you tell it. Tell it, say it out loud so we know where you are, right? It's time to identify those whose work and efforts are moving into the direction, right? We have to know who you are. Right. Let's not just talk about it behind closed doors and let it be a whisper in the winds. Let's say it loud enough to move mountains.
Eddy Voltaire, thank you so much for your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Zack.
Yeah. Be well.
You too. Thank you.
And that was architect and self-described urbanist designer, Eddy Voltaire. Really great chat. Thank you for that, Zack. Starting out right at the top for me, Eddy talked about the concept of adding value. The building should add value to community rather than extracting profit. And it's great to have his experience in working with developers, but also as a builder. And, we find that quite often that people come to Passive House or come to architecture with prior experience is always really valuable, certainly from a technical point of view. But Eddy's experience as a person, but also working with developers, he's obviously thought a lot about the role of buildings and the built environment to communities. And that can either be detrimental or it can be really positive for those communities, and clearly that's something that he thinks about a lot.
Yeah, and I thought that his idea, this notion of policy violence, was really powerful. It was very provocative. It's not a term I had heard, which is probably more an indication of my kind of ignorance than anything, honestly. But and that we've seen buildings are a place where we see policy violence play out in unfair rules that have been going on, since the redlining, and that we've got a pretty checkered past in the United States and also in Canada. There's actually some really powerful storytelling around went on in Toronto with redlining and racism built into our built environment, and so Eddy's reflections on the work that Derek Tillman is doing in Pittsburgh with his project, and the way that it is so rooted in the community that has been there for decades, even rooted in the artwork of one of the residents there, and the public space that's been carved out with this project, was a really inspiring response to that legacy, and I felt really grateful that there was an opportunity to take that in as part of this series that Passive House Network is doing, thanks to the leadership of Eddy and Derek.
I think that concept of colonialism is worldwide, unfortunately. Yeah. Because if you look at our cities, from everything from the concept of land ownership through to the way we design our buildings, to the way the whole real estate market works is a very non-native, non-indigenous way of thinking, and that impacts communities. And I think it's great to have people like Eddy, as he puts it, say things out loud and need to be said. And it's great that he and others like him have the space now, have a voice, and are not afraid to say things the way he sees it, and to call out things like that for what it is, and not necessarily sugarcoat it and dress it up, and go beyond that to say, well, so what? What can we do about that? What can we learn from that? What are the positive outcomes? What would a new type of urban environment look like that benefits people? Which is that's where the positive change comes from, is setting a vision of not just saying what's wrong, but how can we improve things, so that we're not being violent in the way by virtue of carrying on the system the way it is, and being part of that without considering all the impacts. And this concept of touching the ground, I really love that, and I'm so glad you brought it up, and Eddy brought it up, and you reflected back that concept of a plan. When you look at architectural drawings, you're looking down on a piece of land and on this thing that you're creating or imposing on that land. And if you haven't touched the ground there, literally, then you don't know what's going on there, not just in the natural environment, but also for the people that are currently there or passing through that space. So I just thought that was a really nice way of putting that.
Yeah, we were talking about this before we started recording, and just that I think neither of us had ever thought of, it never occurred to us that that's what plans are doing, is they're looking from top down. I mean, that's just it's just so ingrained in the way that we think about buildings. So that was, and
there's an engineering reality of that, and,
right, sure,
and there's a place for that from the design point of view, but it does give you the sense of power and looking down literally on a place, rather than thinking. And I guess that's also why things like walkthroughs are really cool, because you get to have your feet kind of at least virtually on the ground, and kind of from that more human scale perspective. But there's nothing like going to a place, even if it's a patch of grass or a blank or a vacant lot that's about to be built on, and as Eddy said, smell the smells, feel the warmth in that location, see what's going on, who's passing through it. I think it's just really powerful.
Yeah, and I think that that's what's so cool about the work that Derek Tillman is doing as well, because he feels these places are in his bones. This is where he grew up. These are the people this is his community. These are his communities. I say communities because they're, I know that Derek grew up in several neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. But if there's anybody who, knows this place, it's Derek. So, I think that, he can bring a whole different understanding of, he's touched the ground.
Yeah.
You mentioned the kind of the what to do, like what's the step to work towards solutions. And I think that there's the stuff in the built environment, and also in our community. And that's one of the things I really appreciated and am thankful for with the series and what Eddy was sharing. And that is to kind of admonishing us not to be like, don't just be silent. We need to talk about this stuff, and we don't have to be perfect in the way that we talk about it. Silence is complacency, and we can grapple with these questions around equity and diversity and inclusion, and have these conversations, even if it's not easy for us to find the words sometimes, or to find the solutions. And what I also am glad to see that organizations like Passive House Network, also PHS, are being thoughtful in their recruitment and hiring practices, and also in the leadership, the composition of their leadership. So in board leadership, and seeing Eddy and Derek and others on the board of Passive House Network, and PHS is making similar moves. And then also this, things like the programming that we're seeing on the DEI series. I mean, I think that that folks involved would be the first to say that, these are just first steps. There's a lot of work to do.
Sure.
But it's important to see. It's great to see. And it's, I think that, honestly, the Passive House Accelerator could really take some cues from the progress that these guys are making. And I'm glad to see it. And it's fun to be able to take in these kinds of presentations that we just saw in that first episode of the series.
And a practical outcome of that, a tangible outcome, I think Eddy alluded to, is thinking on and genuinely consulting about the best type of housing or building that a community needs, rather than making assumptions about what we might think they need. I don't know how to do that always in the best way, but I think the best thing to do is to be open to the idea of having those conversations as early on as possible, and just clarifying some of the basic assumptions around the size of the dwellings and ownership structure, shared spaces, all those sorts of things that we think of in modern architecture, and whether that's actually what is the most desired outcome for the community.
Yeah, good point.
Awesome stuff. Hey, we got some feedback recently on some previous episodes, which I think was really positive, but I'd be very keen on people's thoughts, particularly on this one and other issues around diversity, inclusion, how to build better communities, anything in this topic and others. But yeah, if you've got thoughts on that, then we'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
Do we have any events? Because we're in the future.
I'm quite certain that we do. March is insane. For the accelerator in terms of events, and also the community in general. So let me share just a few of those. So to begin with, this coming Wednesday, March 15th, we have a project showcase edition of Passive House Accelerator Live, featuring Julie Klump of Preservation of Affordable Housing. She will be discussing the Salem Heights project, which is this incredible retrofit of an affordable housing project north of Boston to Passive House. All the residents will remain in the building during it. The title is Challenges That Led to Opportunities. Then the next Wednesday, March 22nd, we have a construction tech edition of Passive House Accelerator Live, featuring Chris Hill, who will be speaking about offsite construction methods using prefabricated panels. Then on March 22nd, we are doing an industrialized retrofits summit, moving from concept to construction. We're doing this in partnership with PHS. So PHS is actually doing a retrofit summit of its own on Tuesday, the 21st and Thursday, the 23rd. So it's going to be kind of like the past of retrofits, or celebrating projects that have happened on Tuesday. Thursday we'll be looking at their new iteration of their retrofit standard. On Wednesday, in between, we're doing this industrialized retrofits piece that the Passive House Accelerator is producing. So great panel of speakers, including folks from RMI and from PHS and some manufacturers. So that's going to be cool. Then on April the first Wednesday of April, we are going to have our 101 edition of Passive House Accelerator Live. It's going to be with Tessa Bradley, who is awesome. And she's going to be presenting 10 steps to building a single family passive house, tips and tricks from an architect. So this is a continuation of the theme that Michael Ingui started last month with the 10 steps to designing passive house. So lots of stuff. Will include links in show notes. Oh, I should also give a shout out to the folks who are supporting the bonus podcast episodes that you're going to be hearing. Those fine sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors, Innotech Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Minotaur, and Proclima. So a big thank you to them for making those special podcast episodes happen.
Thank you very much. Don't forget, you can always keep up to date with all those events and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to the newsletter and you'll get all the notifications in your email inbox. We look forward to being back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.